Jody Mueller, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So just to get a sense of the lay of the land here, when people ask you how much of the war in Iran versus state policies, the refinery closures, how much of each has to do with the gas prices we're seeing right now?
The global disruption that we are seeing is really just exposing our system and showing how fragile it is because of all of the policies that we've had over the decades of layered policies on top of each other.
And I mean, over the last week, we've heard from Governor Gavin Newsom's administration. California Energy Commission Vice Chair Siva Gunda told a panel of lawmakers this week that California essentially has 6 weeks worth of supply to meet demand. And then beyond that, there are basically a lot of questions. The state could be exposed to higher gas prices after that if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Does the Western States Petroleum Association agree with that assessment?
As the state has moved more and more towards outsourcing our supply here in the state, while demand is not going down, it puts California in a precarious position where they are now competing with other states and countries for their fuel.
He said that, California, that, the fuel could certainly come our way beyond 7 weeks, but it would come at a price. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. We will see, continued pressure on price in an upward direction, unfortunately for consumers, as supply comes down here in the state, and consumers should be concerned.
And $1 more, $2 more, what do you think?
I don't have a crystal ball to speculate on what that price might be, but it's really supply and demand, and we are seeing less and less supply available, and we are competing in a global marketplace. It's a commodity priced, from the worldwide market. So California is going to have to be fighting for that.
What could state lawmakers, state regulators do in the very short term, near term, to help with the situation?
Yeah. First and foremost, we have to protect what we have. I was at that same hearing. I sat on that same panel, and they continued to talk about outsourcing our supply of fuels and bringing in more and more imports into the state of California. And as we do that, that really puts the in-state refineries on an uneven playing field with the importers.
And in the long term, is there something that the state really needs to consider? I know there was a discussion around protecting assets, preventing more refiners from leaving, but what specifically does the oil industry essentially need for that?
Right. We have to have a better business environment in California for the entire business community, but for in-state refining, in-state production, the entire industry. The demand is still high, and the state is moving toward artificially lowering the supply that we have, and that really creates this imbalance. So we have to acknowledge that we need to do something about the business environment here and make it more conducive to refiners wanting to stay, to producers getting that oil out of the ground in the San Joaquin Valley, and having a system that truly supports the needs of the consumers in California.
Are you getting the sense that lawmakers, perhaps the Newsom administration, do they have regrets? Do you get a sense of regret, buyer's remorse with some of the policies they've passed in the last few years that have driven some of your members out of the state?
No. I see more and more policies being proposed. We saw a slew of bills this year, some that we're still having conversations around, some we were able to have some honest conversations about the impact they would have. But when we see policies being proposed like that will be so detrimental to this industry, I don't think that they're getting the message.
Do you think with this discussion around a potential gas tax holiday, how would that help or impact the oil industry if that were to happen? Do you see that happening?
I don't know that I see that happening, because from what I hear from Democratic lawmakers, they don't support that idea. It really wouldn't impact the industry because the taxes are something that are collected and go to the government. So it could lower prices temporarily, but it's a temporary fix. It would have to go back up at some point. I think Professor Bornstein yesterday said he would only support that if there was some built-in mechanism for when it would actually be reinstalled into the tax system.
Professor Bornstein also said that California could go back and reconsider its special fuel blend. Do you concur with that? Could that help? Just obviously that's a long-term conversation, but could that help stave off sort of the vulnerabilities that the state is seeing now?
It's debatable. I think, our companies that are in state have already made those investments to make that gasoline. They helped formulate it. They really went all in, really embraced it. And so it's tough because, again, with the business environment, when they're putting those investments out there and they aren't able to recoup them because now someone can bring in a competing fuel that doesn't have to meet the same specifications, whether it's environmental or labor, that's a tough one.
Okay, so that could be complicated
It
then.
could be.
Okay. I wonder with the election that's upcoming, we have a primary in June, then a general that will reshape the entire leadership of our state's government. Do you feel like you're in a holding pattern right now?
I do feel like everyone's holding their breath and waiting to see, okay, let's get through the primary. Who are the top two? And then where do we go from there? But this is an urgent situation that we're in. And again, there's this global volatility, but California's gas prices were the highest in the nation before anything ever even happened in the Middle East.
And so, do you think urgent action should happen, though, before this election? What would be ideal, or an ideal timeline that could help consumers, ultimately the people who are paying for the gas?
Yes, I think so. Eventually, the conflict will end. It has to at some point. But we still have the highest gas prices in the nation, even higher than Hawaii, where they have to import everything into their state. So having those honest conversations about how we help consumers and how we look at the policies really make sure that localities, the cities, the local air districts, the state level, the feds even, are coordinated and working together to make sure that policies really make sense and do what they're supposed to do and don't hit affordability in the pocketbooks of consumers.
The California Air Resources Board is discussing updates to the Cap and Invest program. The last time we talked, I know WISPA had a lot of issues, a lot of industry folks had a lot of issues with the proposed rules. They went back to the drawing board. They put out a new set of rules. What's the temperature check on that?
They're still moving straight ahead for May 28th for that hearing. We did put in a number of comments there. And while we appreciate that they took a close look at the short term, so really through 2029, end of 2029, and really looked at how they could ease up on some of the allowances for that time period, it doesn't give the assurances beyond that date. So, post 2030 is still a big concern. And when corporations like our companies are making business decisions 10, 15, 20 years down the line, 3 years really doesn't get them to where they need to be to really say, yes, we're going to invest in California and we are going to upgrade these facilities and be here for the long term.
So essentially, California is a tough sell if it's only on like a 3-year timeline, if there's no guarantee for 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes, it's very, very short-term focused at the moment. And we are having discussions and letting them know that we still have concerns. When you look at the timeline that is needed to make those decisions, it's just not built into what they've put forward for May.
I know this week you were also at the confirmation hearing for Sivagunda, the person Governor Gavin Newsom has essentially tapped to monitor this whole situation. What were your comments about Mr. Gunda, and how has he been helpful or hurtful in any of this?
I appreciate that he has really tried to understand the situation. He also is, he leads the division that looks at the data that our companies have to put forward. So he actually gets more information than we do as a trade association. So he sees a lot of the information on imports versus exports and the in-state refining. So I think he has brought the stakeholders together. He has really done a good job of trying to keep the conversations going. Unfortunately, I do think that we are really at the beginning stages of any type of transition, even though we keep hearing the word mid-transition thrown around. So the state is putting policies forward that are very aggressive and aren't really closely looking at the supply and demand balance within the state. And I believe that that's really what's gotten us to a difficult position.
And to take a step back, just to put a pin in all of this, I mean, how at risk is the state of maybe losing another refiner, of maybe losing any of the assets that California has with its fuel supply?
Right. You know, short term, I think that they gave a little bit in the regulation that came forward and that they will be adopting, I assume, on May 28th. But then that's just 3 years. So there is kind of that long-term outlook. And I think most people, when they're looking at the economic impact, they're looking beyond just a couple of years. They're really looking at, these are big facilities that have a huge impact and footprint in California. So you can't just look at it on a short-term basis.
Is there anything else you think we should know?
It's a tough one, and we really are here to try and educate and help everyone understand how delicate our system is and how fragile it is because of these policies. And anything we can all do to really get to the right decision to help consumers is going to be a good one.
Jody, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.